Hey everyone, my name is Pavel Kotov, and after my first tutorial about creating sci-fi particles in Verge, there was a lot of questions on how to create smoke effect, because, well, sci-fi particles are more suitable for something like sparks, while the smoke is more turbulent, more constant, and more random. So I've decided to dig into this theme. And of course, creating smoke is a bit more complicated than just particles, because we need to keep the constant flow, and it is pretty tricky, but still possible and not so difficult. As you can see on the screen, this is the finished result, or two results. Both of them are working well, even if we look at them from different directions. They are affected by lighting, by environments, and they give off this volumetric feeling, so they are kinda realistic. So there are two methods of creating this effect. The first one is kind of similar to what we already know to sci-fi particles, is by using textures and animating them. The second one, however, is more tricky. It is by creating real particles, but of course without coding. Of course we can download some particles codes and implement it, but I am an artist and my goal was to create it without any line of a code. This tutorial will be split in three parts. In the first part, in this part, we will talk about creating the first effect using the textures. So, without further ado, let's jump into Blender. Alright, here is this effect working in Blender. As you can see, everything is the same, the smoke is visible from all the sides. Well, it is not absolutely perfect, but it looks pretty good. So, let's create it from the scratch. First, let's add a plane. Also, you may spot the familiar side. Yes, this is the picture that we used in the first tutorial about particles. This shows us just how amazing random noise textures are. Okay, let's create a material and call it smoke and set it up. Let's drag the texture here, connect it to alpha and make Principled BSDF transparent. Let's select the node, press N, go to options and in blend type set alpha blends. And it looks like that, kinda cloudy. Let's add some tweaks to control transparency. The node Math Multiply will help us with making the texture brighter or dimmer. It works as contrast control. Now let's duplicate it and set it to subtract. It will be brightness control. Alright, looking good so far. And now let's make the texture move. For that we need this simple setup, UV map, and in between vector mapping. If we move it by y-axis, the texture will go up. So let's rotate our plane to -90 degrees, thus making the smoke rise. Alright, looking good. But it is too early to start animating. As you may know from previous tutorial, we would like to add some more randomness into the texture. For that, we need to duplicate the texture and its mapping and copy it just like that. Then we need to overlap them with each other. Let's go with multiply and change subtract a bit so they will be visible. Now let's take second mapping and set it to 2. Also let's scale it a little bit by z-axis so the smoke will be a bit stretched vertically. And now we are ready to animate. Let's add combine color and plug it into both mappings. Now let's put value node into green channel, and by animating the value we will rise the smoke. As you can see, the textures blend together very well. Alright, let's go to Animation tab, set the ends frame to 100 and the active frame to 0. Now let's go back to shading and make this window dope sheet. Then let's add a keyframe to 0th frame and value set to 0. And to 100th frame, the value will be, let's say, 4. Now let's press Ctrl Tab and make the handles linear. Alright, now the animation will be the same speed. Also, we need to make sure that the frame start is set to 0, not 1. By the default in Blender it is set to 1 and we need 0, because there may be some problems if it is set to 1. Let's look at the result. Actually, let's look at the results using sneak peek. And well, it looks kinda okay, but only if we look at it from the front side. On the sides, it disappears. We need to fix it. And the fix is pretty easy. We need to add more planes. So let's go back to Blender and do just that. I like to copy and rotate the first plane by 90 degrees and then select them both, duplicate them and rotate by 45 degrees. And here we have this result. Now we can see the smoke from all the sides, but it looks kinda repetitive. We can see the patterns, especially if we lower brightness. Here we can use the same trick that we used in the first tutorial, the UV shift. Right now all the planes have same UV coordinates, and if we change them a bit, and by that I mean select each plane and move it a little bit, just like that. And by doing this, we almost defeated the patterns. The next step is to check from up or down angle, and we can't see anything. Well, because planes are flat, and for realistic smoke, we need to be able to look at it from different sides. Let's select one of the planes, move it down and scale by Z-axis. Now let's rotate it to 90 degrees and place it right underneath the structure. Then let's duplicate it and rotate by 190 degrees. Now we have two intersecting flows. It is pretty visible, so let's duplicate both of them again and rotate them by 90 degrees. And here we have the effect that kind of resembles plasma. Now we need to do the same to separate UV mapping a little bit, to move them, to remove the visible patterns. Alright, now the main core for this effect is done, but we need to polish it. For that, first we need to smooth the edges, because they are pretty visible. Again, you may be already familiar with this trick, because we used it in the first particles tutorial. By the way, the link will be in the description. What we need to do is to delete everything except of two planes, the vertical and the horizontal one. Do not worry, we will copy them again later. Then let's add another edge right in the center of the plane, and two cuts for the horizontal plane. Then let's create this kind of rhombus object. and subdivide the edges that we just created. After that, when the whole loop is selected, let's press Alt-Shift-S and 1. It will make it circle. Now we can delete the particles on the corners. After that, let's unwrap it. And now we will paint in Vertex Paints mode all the edges on the sides to black. Let's go to Solid modes, press N and T and select black color. And now let's just paint, but only the edges. As we can see, automatic triangulation is not always working well, so let's make triangles manually, just like that. The result looks good. We will also need to add an edge to the top, so the smoke will kinda rise up and then disappear. Here let's also make triangles manually. If after that UV mapping will be corrupted, let's just unwrap it again. Now let's add another multiply node and here input color attribute. Here let's select attribute and plug it into second input of multiply. And now we have smooth edges. I also added another loop cut here at the bottom and painted it black as well. By the way, if we enable correct UVs, the UV map will not be corrupted. I painted it right on top, in real-time mode, and as you can see, it becomes smooth. Now let's move it down a little bit, and here we have our setup. We can also control the smoothness by adding color ramp or just do math nodes like before, or subtract and multiply. Okay, looks good. Now we just need to copy everything, then paste it and shift UVs a little bit. I will leave it behind the scenes. Okay, here we go. The top part is done, but the bottom part is a bit too intense. We can fix it by selecting everything and going back to Vertex Paint to paint the center parts gray. I've also separated the bottom parts and hid the top parts for easier painting. Let's actually change UVs a little bit, because you have a little bit too much of details. Let's scale it down by 0.5. And after that, as UV map was scaled and the texture is moving faster, let's slow down the animation by moving the last keyframe from 4 to 2. Okay, and of course let's not forget about UV randomizing. Alright, looks much better. Now let's unhide everything and see how it looks together. Now we have another problem. When we look at it from a certain angle, we can see the planes that are almost parallel to our view. They are kinda stretched, we see them as a line, and it's not really good. So let's fix it as well. First, let's duplicate output, then press Add, Input, Layer Weight. Let's take facing. This already gives an interesting effect by darkening the center. To see it better, let's change to opaque so we can see all the sides. And here, right in the center, we have a white mask. If we use Fresnel, it gives us kinda similar effect, but here are some unexpected and pretty fast changing shapes that we don't want. So we will be using facing. If we change the blends parameter, we may set this gradient. We can use this gradient to subtract from our alpha. For that, first we need to invert it. So let's add converter math, change the inputs and set it to subtract from 1. So basically we are subtracting our shape from 1. Now playing with blends or with value in subtract, we can control how our mask works. We want the central planes to become dark when we look at them from a sharp angle. Something like that. And when we are happy with the result of this mask, let's move it down, change the shader back to alpha blends, and multiply our alpha by our new mask. Alright, if we don't see anything, we need to play a little bit with the mask and with the visibility of the main alpha. First, let's try fixing it by changing subtract, and we have visibility again, but this time without noticeable lines on sharp angles of view. Now all the edges under any circumstances will be smooth. But if you don't like the results, we can of course play a bit with layer weight. I recommend actually adding output here. Again changing alpha blend to opaque, and we will see the mask. We can tweak it a bit, so the middle part will be even darker. Alright, and in the main output, it looks now even better. Now we have constant flow of rising smoke, which is visible under any angles. And if the smoke plays kind of filling role, for example, a campfire in a distance, or a lot of torches, this will be enough. But we can go even further and make it even more lively and realistic. First, let's give it a little bit more puffiness to some of the planes. Let's scale them up, scale them down, to make the stream of smoke more random. Then I would like to add something extra. Right now the smoke is just rising up, but it rarely works this way. The smoke is a bit more turbulent, it rotates a bit, and we kinda see it. So let's recreate this rotation using the nodes. We already have nodes which control the flow, the location of the texture. And now let's copy it, put the value into the blue channel, and put it all into the rotation of mapping node. Both of them. Now, if we move the value, we can control the direction of the smoke rising. If we animate it gently, the effect will be pretty nice. So let's go to the frame 0 and set the first keyframe. Then let's go to the center of timeline and set it to something small, like 0.23. And then let's just duplicate the first frame to the final frame. And here is the effect. Also, I like adding some offset to it, so it doesn't start straight vertically. For that, let's select the whole curve, then press N, go to modifiers and add cycles. And here we have this sinus-ish wave. Let's move it down a little bit. Something like that. Of course, if your smoke needs to be more turbulent, it is better to leave it at higher position. Alright, and now let's loop it, because cycles modifier mostly does it for us. We just need to set the first frame and the last frame, because frames in between are already set. Now let's just remove cycles modifier. Rotate a little bit first and the last frames, and delete the frame that is outside the time range. Now we just scale them a little bit, move them a bit, and make the first and the last frame closer on y-axis, so the final result will be looped perfectly. Also, for absolutely perfect loop, we need to shift the location of the value which controls the location of the texture a little bit lower. Just like that, about a millimeter. And now the loop is perfect. And here we go, the effect is done. Here we have this interesting, so to say non-linear, random, flowy, a little bit turbulent smoke, which appears random and looks pretty nice. Alright, let's see how it looks in Verge3D. And it looks pretty pale, because alpha works a little bit differently. Not a problem, we always can tweak a little bit alpha input. In this case, what we need is the main multiply node. Let's make it a little bit more pronounced. And it starts to work. We need a little bit more. Here adding one more step. And here we go. The smoke is noticeable and not too pronounced. Of course, we can always tweak the speed, the pronouncedness of the smoke as we want. Now, if we rotate it, the smoke looks kinda, so to say, 3D or volumetric-ish. And that's exactly what we want, because, well, smoke works like that. Alright, now the effect is done and it's ready for use. Let's actually talk a little bit about its usage, about its pros and cons. The pros of this effect is, well, it is pretty easy to set up. We can set it up in 10 to 20 minutes and then use in any project that we want. We can always copy and reuse it, and it will always work. Also, the result of this method looks visually good. It will react to lights, to your environment, so it is kinda volumetric. It looks 3D, all thanks to geometric shape that it has. These planes reflect lights and work together to create the effect. So it is easy to set up and is doing its job. As for the cons, well, while it is easy to set up, it is not so easy to configure, because we have a lot of different types of smoke. We may want the smoke to be denser, we may want smoke to be faster, and for that we need to work a lot in Blender. Need faster smoke? Go back to Blender, change the curves in the animation, check everything, export, look at it, ok. Need denser smoke? Go back to Blender, change materials, and so on and so on. By the way, if we want to animate the smoke source, it will look like that. And well, it's not very pleasing. So we can only use this smoke for static objects. and if the smoke is not the main part of the scene, it is kind of on a background, just like if the campfire is being lit somewhere on the scene. Of course without wind, because the smoke rises only up, etc, etc. So it is more like a quick effect, a quick fix for a smoke. But when we need to change its behavior, we will need to go back to Blender and export many times again. With big scenes, it is not an option, because, well, it takes a lot of time. But almost all of these problems will be fixed with the next method that we will look into in our next tutorial. Look at that. Very interesting. Alright, see you very soon.